Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Ackerman, Interim CEO of World Monuments Fund. We are pleased that you've joined us today for the first ever WMF Webcast. Your support positively impacts more than 40 cultural heritage sites and communities around the world in which we are currently working. We launched this webcast platform to give you, our international network of supporters, a new and direct way to engage with us, learn the latest about our work, and ask questions. World Monuments Fund was founded in 1965 by individuals concerned about finding solutions to safeguard against the accelerating destruction of important cultural treasures. Today, our portfolio of sites and projects are as diverse as the world in which we live, from ancient sites to modern structures, architectural masterpieces to vernacular cityscapes, religious centers to cultural landscapes. The common thread through all our work is the passion felt by communities for their culture. Our conservation work offers benefits to the sites and those living nearby, as well as those visiting from afar. The work provides opportunities to share knowledge, build local capacity, and make the public more aware of the history and significance of treasured places across the world. Today, you'll hear exclusive updates from three of our most exciting projects: the Qianlong Garden at the Forbidden City in Beijing and the craft training program that operates on site, the Alabama African American Civil Rights Heritage Sites Consortium, a 2018 World Monuments Watch site, and finally the mesmerizing rock-hewn churches of Lalibela in Ethiopia, a site at which WMF first worked in the 1960s and to which we returned a decade ago. At the end of the presentations, we'll take questions from you. I encourage you to submit them throughout the webcast via the question panel you should see on your screen. Now I'm pleased to introduce to you our first panelist, Darlene Mcleod, the Senior Program Advisor for World Monuments Fund, who will share more about the restoration of the Qianlong Garden, the private paradise created by the Qianlong Emperor in the 18th century.
In 2000, just as China was opening up prior to the Beijing Olympics, WMF launched a project with the Palace Museum to restore the Qianlong Garden, the Emperor Qianlong's retirement complex in the Forbidden City. In the nearly 2 decades since, this project has grown into one of WMF's largest projects, and it has launched the first master's degree program in conservation in China at Tsinghua University. WMF always works in partnership with local community, academic, or government groups. Our partner on this project is the Palace Museum, which was established in 1925 on the foundations of a Ming and Qing dynasty palace, incorporating its collection of historic treasures. It's a large, comprehensive national museum that embraces the palatial architectural complex, and its location in the Forbidden City was originally established in 1420. In 1987, the entire site was named a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Located in the northeast section of the Forbidden City, the retirement complex measures 12 acres, roughly 7% of the entire Forbidden City's expansive 180 acres. You can see that section in the outline that's pulled out here. And the garden, our project site, is 2 acres, which is here highlighted in green. It shows the site, which is divided into 4 courtyards and contains rockeries and 27 buildings and pavilions. Our project, the Qianlong Garden, was designed and built by the Qianlong Emperor, who ruled China from 1736 to 1795. As a comparison, if you remember when JFK was elected, he would still be ruling today for his rule to be as long as the Qianlong emperors. The emperor built this as a retirement complex at a time when he was sovereign over the richest, largest, and most populous and stable country on earth. The emperor loved gardens, and he was especially inspired by those that he visited in Suzhou during his many excursions to southern China. As emperor, he had a direct hand in every aspect of the design and construction of the palace. The Qianlong Garden is the only surviving garden of the many he helped design. Private and intimately scaled, the 2-acre site comprises 4 courtyards, elaborate rockeries and grottos, and some 27 pavilions and structures. The garden provided the emperor with sumptuous palaces for recreation, leisure, entertainment, and the practice of calligraphy, painting, and poetry, and spiritual practice, as he was a devout Buddhist. While the exteriors of the garden's buildings resemble typical examples of imperial architecture, they house remarkable interiors of extravagant design, constructed using the highest quality materials and craftsmanship of their time. Numbering among the finest extant examples of 18th century imperial interiors, the gardens are prized for their trompe-l'oeil murals, the only surviving murals from imperial China. The garden was largely left dormant after Puyi, China's last emperor, left the Forbidden City in 1924. Its buildings have never been opened to the public. It is one of the most significant historical sites in the Forbidden City and has remained unrestored since imperial times. The garden's elaborate construction and its unique survival presented two primary conservation challenges for the site: how to restore the site when many of the traditional materials and craftsmanship that had been used in its original construction had disappeared from modern China, and how to bring back and enhance those traditional craftsmanship skills with modern scientific conservation techniques. A detailed master plan was developed and adopted. The goals of the conservation plan are to restore the garden and the historic interiors of the 27 buildings, to revive as many of the traditional materials and Chinese crafts as possible, those that were used in the garden's original construction, by finding surviving sources and using them in the restoration project, to introduce international scientific conservation methods, to create an innovative interpretation plan for the garden site, to educate both Chinese and international audiences about the Qianlong period of China's history, and to create the first conservation training program and facility in the Forbidden City, dedicated to Chinese furniture and historic interiors, to benefit the Forbidden City and serve as an international resource for the field. Conservation began with the restoration of Zhenqing Jai. It contains perhaps the most opulent of the garden's interiors and was completed in 2008. Many of the WMF's projects include training programs to build local conservation capacity. One of the most advanced training programs we have created is CRAFT. It began as a training program for mid-career professionals working at the Palace Museum, and it's grown into the first master's degree program in China. Our partners in the program are the Palace Museum and Tsinghua University's School of Architecture. The next building that was restored was Wonga, the tallest and most complex building in the garden. Its restoration was completed in 2017. It includes rare examples of bamboo thread marquetry. And this slide shows the craftsman breaking down the bamboo from bamboo stalks, which you can see in the upper left-hand side of the photograph, to creating the actual threads, which are then used to create the pictures that you see on the right. Most recently, work has been continuing in the fourth courtyard, where the Hall of Bamboo Fragrance, which is connected to Zhenqing Jai with a secret passageway, is being restored. The walls, you can see, are covered with the original calligraphy done by the Qianlong Emperor. The other building currently being worked on is Jade Purity, which includes a beautiful wall-sized mural, which you see here, a scene of a noble woman surrounded by children playing. Currently, work is continuing on the design of the Visitor Center. The Visitor Center will be included in the second courtyard. The designs are underway, and when completed, it will tell the story of the design and building of the Qianlong Garden and then its restoration more than 200 years later. The conservation challenges we face in the garden involve not only the restoration of the material fabric of the lodge and making it physically and programmatically accessible to the public, but also addressing the challenges of recreating the historic artisan skills and techniques long lost. We've brought many international specialists to the site, and in addition, we've constructed a new conservation studio within the Forbidden City to teach conservation. This photo shows one of the conservators from the Met looking at some of the panels in situ. This photo shows the two of the craftsmen working on the restoration of the speckled bamboo panels. These panels were removed from the site for conservation. The conservation protocol was developed by WMF, and now the Chinese conservators are putting the bamboo panels back together, literally. There are 12 panels to be restored. Each panel has taken 2 craftsmen more than 2 months to restore. This shot shows the craft students actually learning how to paint some of the bamboo, faux speckled bamboo. And here are the pieces being pieced back together. It's like a giant puzzle with thousands of tiny pieces of bamboo that have to be fitted back into these panels. The Qin Lan Garden is expected to be largely complete by 2020 at a cost of approximately $25 million. The Palace Museum is contributing more than $5 million towards the project and is covering the cost of the conservation of the exteriors and the infrastructure of the garden's 27 buildings. WMF is raising $20 million towards the project budget. To date, we've raised approximately $17 million in international funds to cover the cost of conservation of the interiors, the furnishings, the artworks, and the international expertise that's necessary in conservation science. The craft training program has become an integral part of the Tsinghua University School of Architecture, and together with the Qianlong Garden project, is changing the future of conservation in China.
Thank you, Darlene. As everybody undoubtedly can sense, this is a complex project that involves a lot of people, a lot of different kinds of materials, and great attention to detail. Now I'm pleased to introduce Priscilla Hancock Cooper, Project Director of the Alabama African American Civil Rights Heritage Sites Consortium. Priscilla and the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute nominated this remarkable group of sites to the 2018 World Monuments Watch. Today, we are thrilled to partner with Priscilla and BCRI on an oral history project to document the stories of homes, churches, and meeting places in Selma, Montgomery, and Birmingham, all notably at the center of the civil rights movement.
Hello. The Alabama African American Civil Rights Heritage Consortium is a unique partnership between 20 historic places of worship, lodging, and civic engagement that played significant roles in the African American struggle for freedom. Located in Montgomery, Birmingham, Selma, and Alabama's Black Belt, these sites weave together the narrative of major campaigns of the movement for nonviolent social change of the 1950s and 1960s. This includes the Montgomery bus boycott, the Birmingham Children's Campaign, and the March from Selma to Montgomery for voting rights. The consortium was launched in January 2017 when the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute nominated the sites to the World Monuments Fund watch list. In preparation for the nominations, representatives from potential sites were invited to a convening at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. More than 20 passionate and committed individuals shared the history of their institutions, their vision for the future, and the challenges they faced. The energy in the room was palpable, and it was obvious that there was a need for continued and sustained collaboration. And so, the decision to apply for the Watch nomination actually provided the impetus for creation of the Alabama African American Civil Rights Heritage Sites Consortium. In the months prior to the WMF announcement, with funding from the Educational Foundation of America, the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute hired consultants to organize a consortium advisory committee, conduct a needs assessment, and sponsor a second convening in September of 2017. When the World Monuments Fund announced that the Alabama Consortium was included in the 2018 Watch, the group had grown to the current diverse group of 20 cultural heritage sites. While recent history focuses on their role in the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, these individual institutions and the individuals who created and sustained them have been dedicated to improving the quality of Black life since Reconstruction. The consortium includes churches that have become international icons identified with major events in the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century, including Dexter Avenue King Memorial Baptist Church, where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was pastor and led the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955. 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, which was a launching ground for the Children's Campaign of 1963 and subsequently the infamous bombing that killed 4 little girls later that year. Braille Chapel AME Church in Selma was a training ground for demonstrators and also was the beginning of the 1965 Selma to Montgomery March for voting rights. The consortium includes other little-known locations, like the Benmore Hotel in Montgomery. Pictured here is Malden Brothers Barbershop that operated there during the Civil Rights Movement. The Benmore provided lodging and safe haven for Black travelers during segregation and secure meeting places for activists planning the movement. The Richard Harris House sheltered participants in the Freedom Rides and was also the location for strategy sessions that included John Lewis, Dr. King, and Ralph Abernathy. In Selma, the Jackson family home was the site for planning sessions and the place where Dr. King stayed during much of that campaign. Whether prominent or unknown, these sites have been sustained through the passion, commitment, and Herculean efforts of dedicated volunteers who are committed to preserving not only these historic properties, but their important stories. These are the stories of individuals and institutions who laid the foundation for the civil rights movement, redefining how we view ourselves as Americans and shining as a beacon of hope for those struggling for human rights around the globe. As noted by project historian Georgette Norman, many of these sites trace their history back more than 130 years. From Reconstruction through the early 20th century, these institutions were the heart and soul of the Black community. These were the incubators for Black education, entrepreneurship, advancement, and achievement. During these years when Black life was circumscribed by racial bigotry, oppression, disenfranchisement, and vigilante violence, these institutions nurtured an individual and collective determination to rise above limited expectations and circumstances to strive for excellence. In the aftermath of the 1960s and the Civil Rights Movement, these sites, along with their communities, have suffered from the negative consequences of displacement, urban renewal, interstate highways, and neighborhood disinvestment. In spite of these challenges, these dedicated volunteers with limited resources remain firm in their commitment to preserve these sites and to engage a new generation to use this shared history as a tool for community revival, renewal, and revitalization. The World's Monument Fund Watch has provided visibility and credibility for these sites. The World Monuments Fund Watch List provides a global platform for Alabama's African American civil rights heritage sites to share their remarkable stories and to gain the resources required to sustain them. The World Monuments Fund featured the consortium at the 2017 Hadrian Gala in an article in Architectural Digest and on its website and in the Watch magazine. In January 2018, a media event introduced the consortium and the WMF Watch List designation. In February, U.S. Congresswoman Terry Sewell was the keynote speaker at a series of watch list announcement events in Selma, Montgomery, and Birmingham. These WMF events generated enthusiasm and support for preservation efforts at these sites in the broader community and often within the institutions themselves. During this past year, the consortium has focused on capacity building to provide the sites with knowledge and resources that will help them to develop plans for long-term sustainability. In June, the consortium hosted a 2-day training, Building for Sustainability, where more than 80 representatives from the sites participated in workshops, panels, and one-on-one discussions with national, state, and local preservation leaders. Presenters included staff from the National Park Service, National Trust for Historic Preservation, Fund for Sacred Places, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Participants were then charged with developing action plans to be implemented at their sites over the next 18 months. The consortium and the individual sites have benefited collectively and individually from meaningful relationships developed with national supporters and donors. The World Monuments Fund, the Educational Foundation of America, and the J.M. Kaplan Fund had representatives who attended the June training and have also sponsored trips to Alabama for their trustees, staff, and supporters to visit the consortium sites. The Educational Foundation of America funds operational support, including staff, training, and public relations. The consortium's website was launched on the BCRI site in August with additional marketing materials in development. With support from other funders, the consortium is engaged in documentation to preserve both the physical buildings and narratives of the people who created this important history. J.M. Kaplan Fund has provided grants for research and collection of records that document the buildings within their unique cultural and community context. Files have been created for each site in both paper and electronic formats. Information collected was distributed at the September 2018 convening, along with a starter kit of archival supplies. In addition, students from Tuskegee University's new Historic Preservation Program will work with the sites to do documentation of the physical structures using drone photography, laser scanning, and hand drawing. This documentation will provide valuable resources for researchers and for the individual sites as they build their own records and apply for preservation funding. The World Monuments Fund is supporting an oral history project for the consortium that includes interviews with individuals who were active with the site during the Civil Rights Movement. Collecting these orals history was identified as a key priority when the sites gathered because of the age of most of the movement foot soldiers. WMF will edit these interviews for use on a variety of platforms, and in addition, copies will be made available to the site. The interviews, both raw footage and edited version, will then be accessible to researchers via the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute archives as part of its existing and extensive collection of oral histories focused on civil and human rights. The Birmingham Civil Rights Institute continues to work in partnership with the World Monuments Fund and Alabama's African American Civil Rights Heritage Sites to bring to light their hidden history, providing both inspiration and instruction to those seeking to understand this history and to continue the work to secure human rights, equality, and dignity for our global community. We look forward to continuing this great work together.
Thank you, Priscilla. World Monuments Fund considers itself very lucky to be a partner with you, BCRI, and the consortium members. And as with the Qianlong Garden project, it's evident that all WMF projects require a great deal of coordination and partnership. We look forward to hearing more about the completion of the oral history program and sharing it with those of you on the phone and also our other donors and supporters. Now I'm pleased to introduce Stephen Battle, our final speaker, who is a WMF project director currently overseeing a portfolio of projects in sub-Saharan Africa, including our work at the churches of Lalibela in Ethiopia.
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everybody. Few places in the world compare with Lalibela. Located high in the Ethiopian highlands, the 11 churches at Lalibela are hewn from solid rock and interconnected by a network of subterranean passages and caverns. According to tradition, the complex was built by King Lalibela, whose name means the bees know this child will become king, and who ruled Ethiopia from the late 12th to early 13th centuries. The architecture of the churches is an extraordinary fusion of styles, incorporating ancient motifs from Aksum and the civilizations of the Upper Nile with Coptic and Orthodox Christian iconography, together creating something entirely unique. Lalibela is one of the most iconic heritage sites in Africa, and it remains the most important place of pilgrimage for Ethiopia's Orthodox Christians. It is also increasingly important economically. Tourism is now a significant part of the country's economy, and Lalibela is the best known and most visited destination in Ethiopia. But despite its significance, the condition of Lalibela is a cause for serious concern. Monolithic structures hewn from solid rock are as strong and as enduring as the stone out of which they are carved, but they also retain the stone's inherent weaknesses. Over time, natural fissures present in the rock have widened due to seismic activity and erosion, weakening structures and allowing rainwater to percolate inside. Where the rock is soft, it is being eroded by wind and water. More recently, the rapid growth in tourism has increased erosion of exposed stone surfaces underfoot. In the early 2000s, in an effort to slow the rate of decay, the European Union funded a project to erect temporary shelters over 5 churches. Now, whilst these shelters have helped to reduce rainwater falling on some of the buildings, this partial fix comes at a very high price. The shelters are intrusive and profoundly alter the appearance and intangible values of the site. There is now a strong grassroots movement in Lalibela to get rid of them. World Monuments Fund became involved in Lalibela in the mid-2000s. This new phase of work is actually a continuation of a long-standing commitment by WMF to the site, dating back to 1965, long before it was listed as a World Heritage Site and became internationally known. The goal of our current project is to demonstrate that there are alternatives to the modern shelters. This is critical for 2 reasons. First, because only 5 of the 11 churches are covered, which means the other 6 are still being rained on, and this water is continuing to damage them. And secondly, because the shelters are temporary. The steel superstructure will probably last hundreds of years, but the fabric covering them typically has a design life of only 20 years. This means that they will eventually fail, and at that point, the Ethiopians will have to make a decision: either spend millions replacing the fabric or go about conservation of the churches in a different way. So our brief is to protect the churches that are not covered, demonstrate that there are alternative ways of conserving the churches that follow conservation principles, use traditional methods and materials, and are visually non-intrusive, and to ensure that there are skilled craftspeople available in Lalibela with the knowledge to carry out repairs in the future. In this way, we hope to make it possible to eventually remove the shelters. An extensive period of analysis and research at the site, carried out in partnership with UNESCO and the Ethiopian Authority for Research and Conservation of Cultural Heritage, was completed in 2010. And in 2014, we started conservation at one of the churches not covered by a shelter, which was in a serious condition, Beta Gabriel Raphael. Main funding for this project came from the US Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation. The scope of work included cleaning rock surfaces to remove extensive organic growth, conservation of stone surfaces, conservation of eroded stone, and covering the roof with a lime screed to prevent water percolating inside or cascading down the facades of the church, which was one of the main causes of decay. This project was successfully completed in December 2015. In 2017, we received a second grant from the US Ambassador's Fund to carry out conservation at a second set of churches that are uncovered, Beta, Golgotha, and Michael. As at the previous project, there were serious problems with uncontrolled drainage from the roof, stone decay, both inside and outside, and large cracks in the roof. An additional important goal of this project was to work as much as possible with locally available materials rather than rely on expensive imported materials. By demonstrating that local materials are just as good as imported ones, it means that the process becomes replicable, not only at Lalibela, but at hundreds of other rock-hewn churches in Ethiopia. The scope of work was very similar to Beta Gabriel Raphael and included conservation of eroded stone surfaces, both inside and out, and installing a new parapet around the perimeter of the roof to control drainage. The work of WMF has demonstrated that there are alternative solutions to the shelters, but conservation is not a permanent fix. It has to be maintained over time. The most important factor to ensure the survival of Lalibela is the presence on site of skilled craftspeople who can carry out conservation in the future. For this reason, WMF has invested time and effort into training, commencing in 2010, and there is now a core group of Mason priests connected to the site who have knowledge and skills to carry out conservation. In this way, we hope Lalibela can be preserved for future generations. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stephen. I hope everybody has enjoyed the webcast, and even for those of us here at WMF, it's a real treat to have Darlene, Priscilla, and Stephen all together at the same time, something that doesn't always happen at WMF because our work is spread out across the globe. So we promised questions, and I have a few questions already about Lalibela, Alabama, and the Qianlong Garden. And just in fairness, because it's been a while since we've seen or heard from Darlene, I think I'll start with the question we have for the Qianlong Garden. So Darlene, hopefully you're ready. So our first question is, why was the decision made to start a training program at the Qianlong Garden? And how do you see those trainees playing a role in the future at the site?
It's a great question. The decision was made because, like many of our programs, conservation in China was a different approach, and our approach added some of the Western scientific skills and technologies to the craftsmanship that is the hallmark of Chinese conservation. So we started by training employees who work at the Palace Museum in conservation, and then expanded that to other museums and to students at Tsinghua University. The result is really changing the future of conservation in China. Each class is a 2-year program. At the end of the 2-year program, 2 students from each class receive a 2-month internship abroad. So far, our students have interned at Winterthur and also at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So they're exposed in more depth to Western conservation approaches. And then they've gone back, and we've seen tremendous growth in our graduates in the field of conservation in China. They're writing papers, and they're becoming the future leaders of the field, which is very exciting for us to see.
Thanks so much. I'm going to take one more question for the Qianlong Garden, and then I'm going to move to the next 2 sites. And hopefully, Darlene, this isn't the last we'll hear your voice, but I just wondered what you think the lasting impact of this project will be.
I think the lasting impact is not only in the conservation and the opening to the public of the Qianlong Garden, which is an incredible site. You could only get a glimpse of it in the few photos that I showed. So bringing that back to life and opening it to the public, I think, is really important for China. And also the training program. The master's degree program at Tsinghua will continue, and in fact, they already have plans for it to grow and expand. So I think the impact here is really significant for China and for visitors around the world who come to China.
Thanks so much. So hopefully Stephen has caught his breath from the presentation and ready to answer some questions. So Ethiopia can seem very far away for many of us, and many of us may only experience Lalibela through video and photos and people like Stephen telling us about the site. I just wondered if you could tell us, Stephen, a little bit about what the experience is on the ground at Lalibela today. What's the relationship between the community, the worshipers, the churches themselves, and what's the rhythm of life for those churches?
So thanks for the question, Lisa. I think the first thing to say is that the churches at Lalibela are the most important site for Ethiopia's Orthodox Christians. So Lalibela is a town of priests and nuns, basically. 3/4 of the permanent population there are connected in some way to the church. And then at important times of year, such as the Ethiopian Christmas Jena, population swells to about 200,000 people, which is a huge number. So the churches are of huge significance, and people in Ethiopia really believe that every particle of the stone has some kind of religious significance to them. I think it's difficult to underestimate how important this site is for Ethiopia.
Well, thanks. I'm going to ask you one more question. In the medieval period, if you know your art history, we know that there are places like Cappadocia in Turkey and Saspool in India where there were religious temples, churches, etc., often built into caves. The churches of Lalibela are very striking because they were carved from live rock, not quarried stone, and because there's an ensemble of them. It's a whole environment. So we think of Lalibela as very unique, but I wonder if there are other examples around the world of similar types of ensembles of rock-hewn churches, or other examples in Ethiopia that might pique our curiosity.
So certainly in Ethiopia, there are many examples. In fact, it's often said that in the province of Tigray, which is to the north of Amhara, where Lalibela is located, there are over 200 rock-hewn churches just in that region alone. In Ethiopia, there are many examples of this, and in fact, one of the most important aspects of what we've been trying to achieve at Lalibela is to develop a suite of technical solutions that can be replicated elsewhere throughout Ethiopia. So that's why there was this important emphasis in the last project on using as much as possible locally available materials, and of course training people so that the methodology and then importantly, crucially, the knowledge is available to do similar conservation work elsewhere in Ethiopia. Now, with regards other places in the world, of course, the one that comes to mind is Cappadocia in Turkey, where there are similar churches. In fact, an entire town which is carved out of rock. As I think you mentioned, there are also temples in India as well that are carved from the live rock.
Well, fascinating. I think we have some topics building for our next webcast. In the meantime, I'm going to ask Priscilla to give us a little insight on what happens next for the consortium sites. How is the general public engaged, and how do you hope the general public will be engaged in experiencing these sites going forward?
Thank you, Lisa. The next step for the consortium sites, as I mentioned, is really focusing on capacity building. Among the sites, about half are able to accept visitors at this point, and about half probably are not at this point. So over this next year, we will really be looking at the visitor experience, how these sites might be more effectively connected to current civil rights tourism, and how they can develop plans to sustain themselves. While many of them have been open to visitors, the issue of making their buildings, preserving their buildings, but also making them accessible and usable by the general public is a very important part of the work that we're doing. So we're very excited. There's a lot of interest around civil rights tourism, and we want to be sure that our sites are prepared and engaged in that. And also a new generation. So we're looking at expanding upon the Civil Rights Institute's successful youth leadership program and expanding that to our consortium sites so that young people, particularly high school students, become knowledgeable and engaged in that history and have the opportunity to be trained and serve as docents at our consortium site.
Well, that's fantastic. And actually, one of your comments leads directly to another question that was posed, which is on WMF's website, we talk about the sites as being the civil rights sites in Birmingham, Montgomery, and Selma. But in fact, many of the sites are located in rural areas outside of town, and Selma, Montgomery, and Birmingham are not equal cities. They're different sizes, different needs going on in them. I wonder, do any of the sites face particular difficulties because of their location? And also, tourism is a very important element, but also tourism can sometimes overwhelm sites. So I just wonder if you and the consortium members have any thoughts about how you want to manage tourism.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about this project is that each of the communities is very unique. Birmingham, The Birmingham Civil Rights sites were recently recognized. Birmingham now has a National Park Service site, the Birmingham Civil Rights National Monument that is in development. The city of Birmingham had established a civil rights district about 30 years ago. So there's been ongoing recognition and development around civil rights in Birmingham. Montgomery is the state capital, which in itself creates some unique opportunities and challenges, of course, with the recent opening of the Equal Justice Initiative Memorial and Museum in Montgomery. We look for ways to connect with that initiative, which has literally drawn hundreds of thousands of new visitors to Montgomery. Selma is a small town within the Black Belt of Alabama. As you mentioned, two of our sites are not actually located within the city of Selma. One is in Greensboro, Alabama. The other is in Lowndes County. And so those rural sites do face unique challenges just in terms of access to the public and transportation, hotel accommodations. And so we hope to work with particularly the city of Selma, and there are several other Black Belt initiatives, economic development initiatives, cultural initiatives that we hope to partner with to increase the visibility of those sites.
Well, that's great. So I know we wanted to be mindful of people's time, and this has really been great. We could talk for hours more, I'm sure. Just to wrap this up before we say goodbye, I just want to give everybody one chance to tell us, you know, one sentence you hope everybody remembers from today's webcast. So Darlene, one final thought about the Qianlong Garden?
If you're visiting Beijing, make sure you, in the next year, when it opens in 2020, make sure you add it to your bucket list.
That sounds great. Well, Priscilla, I'm going to circle back to you. Anything that in particular you want to tell people to be on the lookout for the Alabama civil rights sites?
Well, we do want to encourage you to visit Alabama. Let us know if you're coming, but also part of our project is to expand the narrative and to help increase the understanding that the civil rights movement grew out of institutions that had been established before the turn of the 20th century, and that it was based on that development that the foundation for the civil rights movement was laid.
Thanks so much, Priscilla. Stephen, a final thought about Lalibela?
Well, Africa seems far, but actually it's really not so far. Ethiopia is a fabulous country to visit, and Lalibela is really an extraordinary site. I mean, I think the only thought I would say people should take away is from what we're doing in Lalibela is that the key thing actually is knowledge. Everything else is, of course, crucially important, but knowledge is really what we're there to create.
Well, thanks so much. I'm going to thank Darlene, Stephen, and Priscilla for sharing their knowledge with us. And I'm also going to say that one of the great privileges of being here at WMF is you get to learn so much about these extraordinary places. But I think we're also always reminded that we often think about them from the tourism point of view. But of course, locally, these places are embraced for any number of reasons, which can be religious worship, or they're the source of work and livelihood for so many people in those communities. And so we have a really privileged opportunity to share our knowledge and also help people really understand why these places are so special. So thanks to everybody who joined the webcast today. And please let us know if you enjoyed it and if you'd like us to do it again. And wishing everybody happy holidays.